Hello everyone, Happy New Year and welcome to the first Rewind review of 2024. And coincidentally, it also happens to be the 100th video on this channel. So with that in mind, I wanted to take a look at one of my all-time favourite movies, and that movie is Batman Mask of the Phantasm. Released in 1993 and based on the characters appearing in DC Comics, Batman Mask of the Phantasm sees Batman wrongly implicated in a series of murders of mob bosses actually committed by a brand new vigilante assassin. Directed by Eric Radomski and Bruce Timm, with Kevin Altery, Boyd Kirkland, Dan Reba and Frank Poor as sequence directors, with writers Alan Burnett, Paul Dini, Martin Pascoe and Michael Raves, and features the voice talent of Kevin Conroy, Dana Delaney, Hart Bochner, Stacey Keach, Abe Vigoda, Dick Miller, John P. Ryan, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., Bob Hastings, Robert Costanzo and Mark Hamill. Okay, I'm going to be completely honest here, I didn't actually know what it is that I should do for my 100th video on this channel. I was planning on introducing a brand new segment, and I did have a lot of ideas about what it was that I was going to do with that segment, but unfortunately time just didn't really work out for me, so I thought, why don't I just pick a special movie, a movie that's special to me, one of my all-time favourites. And I came to realise, looking back on all the videos that I have released over the past 2 years, that as a DC Comics fan, I haven't actually done any videos related to any of the animated movies. I mean, sure, I've brought them up, I've mentioned them in a few of my other DC related videos, but I've never actually had a full video dedicated to one. And with Mask of the Phantasm celebrating its 30th anniversary last year, I thought, why not start with this one? Mask of the Phantasm is a full-length feature film spin-off from the, well, there's only one word I can use to describe it, flawless 1992 animated series, and sees Batman investigating and being blamed for the crimes of a mysterious vigilante targeting a number of Gotham's high-profile crime bosses. Meanwhile, Bruce Wayne gets to reconcile with an old flame from his time before he became the Dark Knight. It's a completely standalone story that, yes, is set within the same continuity as Batman the Animated Series. I believe this came out in between series 1 and 2, but it doesn't continue any stories from the TV show, and nor does anything from this movie get continued on in season 2 or onwards, despite the fact that all the characters, all the relationships and a lot of their dynamics are taken directly from the TV show. But to be fair, that is basically what every single episode of the TV series did. Every single episode of Batman the Animated Series was able to tell its own story within a 22-minute runtime. Very rarely would you ever have a two-parter storyline, but those ones were saved for special occasions, like the introduction of Two-Face, of Clayface, as well as Batgirl. And that is exactly what happens here, with Mask of the Phantasm getting to tell a grounded and dark murder mystery story in the vein of a noir detective thriller, with loads of comic booky elements thrown in too, all within a 76-minute runtime. I think the fact that this movie does embrace the detective style of Batman, with him basically doing a lot of analysing of things that he's picked up at crime scenes, even recording himself on a little voice recorder, but it also embraces the more over-the-top elements that you would expect to find more within the comics. And that's one of the things that helps separate this movie from a lot of the other interpretations of this character, because most of those other versions tend to either focus on one aspect or something else. Like the Christopher Nolan movies, for example, even though they are fantastic movies, some of the best superhero movies ever made, when it comes to how they interpret Batman and his world, it is a lot more oriented towards like an action setting rather than being a just full-on detective story. And that is one of the reasons why I absolutely loved Matt Reeves' The Batman, which released in 2022, because it focused on the detective elements. I've even got the poster! The only problem is that the mystery of that movie does not revolve around who is actually the one committing all these murders. We know it's the Riddler going into the film. He shows up within the first 5 minutes, so we know who it is. But the mystery is more about why it is that the Riddler is doing what he's doing, why he's targeting these specific people, and how it is that the Wayne family actually fits in with that. That's something that this movie doesn't actually need to worry about, because yes, there are definitely some elements of inspiration from other comic books that have released over the years, like Year One, but the Phantasm, even though there is a little bit of inspiration from 2 other Batman villains that have appeared in the comic books, the Phantasm as a character is completely original. This is actually the second time that this creative team has actually created a brand new character exclusively for this universe. But unlike their other creation, Harley Quinn, the Phantasm has never really appeared in anything since. I know there has been a comic book series that has released quite recently with Batman and Catwoman, and I believe the Phantasm has appeared in that, but I'm not quite sure to what extent. But outside of that, the Phantasm has never appeared in anything else. But in all honesty, having a brand new original character created exclusively for this movie means that even long-time Batman fans can go into this movie and be surprised. But just before I proceed any further, I think this is probably the best place to actually do this. Out of courtesy to the people who have not seen this movie, I'm going to try and avoid spoilers as best I can. I do need to mention a couple of plot elements here and there, plus I do need to mention one other particular character that does make an appearance in this. Chances are you might have caught their name when I was listing the cast for this movie, so you probably know who it is that I'm talking about. But anything relating to the Phantasm's identity, the reason why the Phantasm is going after the crime bosses, anything related to that whatsoever, that is the stuff that I am not going to be getting into. But what I can say about the Phantasm, the appearance is excellent, the character comes across as really creepy and intimidating with a really ethereal voice courtesy of voice actor Stacey Keach. The mystery that is built up around this character is really good. There's lots of little clues and hints surrounding who they are, and that makes this one of those movies that does actually benefit from repeat viewings. And on top of that, every single thing in this movie does make sense. The Phantasm is an excellent character and by far one of the most interesting Batman villains to come from the animated continuity. It's just a shame that they haven't done much with the Phantasm since. But this movie isn't all about the Phantasm, it is a Batman movie after all, and Batman is voiced by the legend himself, Kevin Conroy. Say what you will about the live action Batman actors, but it is pretty much unanimously agreed that Conroy is the voice of Batman, bringing the right amount of gravitas and authority to the Dark Knight and adding a lighter and more human quality to Bruce Wayne. In terms of what it is that they do with Batman in this movie, it is really good, and it's something a little bit different. It explores a time in Bruce's life that hardly ever gets shown on screen, and we see multiple flashbacks to a time when Bruce was younger and still developing his other persona. We even see him going out and fighting criminals in a makeshift costume, designing the cape and cowl, and you even see the inspiration for the Batmobile. But then we get introduced to a woman called Andrea Beaumont, voiced by the incredible Dana Delaney, who has a hugely important role here and has a proper impact on Bruce's life. When they meet and start to form a romantic relationship, Bruce begins to see a chance at being happy, but he feels guilty about it, to the point where we get one of my favourite scenes of this entire film with Bruce beside his parents' gravestone, begging them to let him move on and be happy. It is an absolutely masterful scene that has some absolutely incredible imagery, and it's all backed up by that really haunting score. No other Batman movie has ever had a scene like this before, or even since, and that is something that really does help separate this movie and let it stand out from the rest. It might sound a little bit disconnected from the story involving the Phantasm, but trust me, it is hugely important to the overall plot of this movie, and I love how it's handled. We also get one of the best interpretations of Alfred too, voiced by the excellent Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. He doesn't do too much in this, but he does have some really good words of wisdom, and he adds a good few speckles of light comedic relief that never feels out of place. What kind of city are we running when we have to depend on the support of a potential madman? What rot, sir? Why, you're the very model of sanity. Oh, by the way, I've pressed your tight and put away your exploding gas balls. Sarcastic Alfred is the best kind of Alfred. He is one of my absolute favourite interpretations of Alfred, and I am so glad that he gets to appear in this. Honestly, like the animated series, all of the voice talent is brilliant, most of whom are from the series, which is great to hear because most of these voices, especially for fans, are the voices that they hear when they read the comics. Standouts for me include Robert Costanzo as Harvey Bullock, Hart Bochner as Arthur Reeves, who gets one of the most hilariously dramatic scenes of the entire movie. He's basically like fighting off all these fits of laughter while he's trying to deliver all this really dramatic dialogue. It's really good. There's also Abe Vigoda, who voices Salvatore Valestra, Dick Miller as Chucky Sol, and even Bob Hastings reprising his role as Commissioner Gordon, who only actually has a small appearance in this. I definitely thought when I first saw this movie that Gordon was going to have a much more prominent role in this movie, but he's only really in like the beginning section, and then that's the last you see of him. It does make sense why, considering that this movie does have a very short runtime, but I do think that it would have been a little bit more interesting if Gordon had been a little bit more actively involved in the story for this movie, because he is the only person within the police department that actually trusts Batman and doesn't think that he's a murderer, and it would put him in direct conflict with Harvey Bullock, who's one of the other officers who is convinced that Batman is the murderer and is the one who's in charge of the manhunt. So I do think that that is one missed opportunity, but as I said, I do understand that this movie does have a very short runtime, but considering just how much that this creative team are able to do within this short space of time, it is genuinely impressive and they take full advantage of it. But of course, I can't do this review without mentioning this next character. He is one of the most iconic villains of all time. Yes, the Joker is in this, and he is voiced once again by the maestro himself, Mark Hamill. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to put into words what my reaction was the first time I actually found out that Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker himself, was the voice of the Joker. Before I actually watched Batman the Animated Series, I was a big fan of the Spider-Man animated series from 1994, And one of the characters in that is the Hobgoblin. And when I started watching Batman and the Joker came on screen and they started talking, I thought, he sounds quite similar to the Hobgoblin. So then one day, just out of pure curiosity, I decided to look up if these two characters were voiced by the same person. And then when I saw who it was who did voice both of these characters, oh my god. Mark Hamill is still the definitive voice of the Joker, with even the more modern animated films and games still using his voice as the template. He's really funny with honestly some of the best lines of the movie, but it's all balanced out with a hell of a sinister undertone, making him feel far more threatening than other versions. You're never quite sure how scenes with him will unfold, and that's what makes him such a fun character. I've got to be honest, the first time that I watched this movie and the Joker shows up on screen, I did get a little bit worried about what it was that they were going to be doing with the overall story, because I was convinced at that moment in time that they were going to kind of shift gears away from the Phantasm story and turn it into yet another Joker movie. Seriously, DC, there's other Batman villains out there, but thankfully he actually does fit into this story really well, and he doesn't actually take away from the Phantasm storyline. He is integrated into this really well. He's not just thrown into this movie just for the sake of having the Joker appear in it. He actually does serve a purpose. Plus, he gives probably the greatest Joker laugh that has ever been recorded in this movie. The voice talent in this movie is absolutely excellent, and everyone is doing some fantastic work. Also doing some fantastic work is Shirley Walker, who returns to compose the score. I mentioned in one of my previous Batman videos that Shirley Walker had actually previously worked on the Tim Burton movie as an uncredited music conductor for the Danny Elfman soundtrack, but she went on to do the actual composing herself for the Batman animated series, Superman the animated series, and Batman Beyond. That's partly why the soundtrack for the Batman animated series is so similar to the Danny Elfman soundtrack, but she does give the soundtrack this unique flair that matches both the tone and style of this iteration of the character, plus all of the villains all have their own unique themes. The main themes that Shirley Walker created for both Batman and the Joker are brought from the series into this, and with the increased budget, she is able to create something that is far more epic and a lot more dramatic. The soundtrack feels so much bigger than it ever has before, with this almost operatic undertone that does work overall, and it does heighten every scene that it is used in. It sounds incredible, and it is absolutely one of the best Batman soundtracks that has ever been made. I've only just recently found this out, but Hans Zimmer, who is one of the greatest composers of all time, who worked on the Dark Knight trilogy alongside Man of Steel and Batman v Superman, he was actually a synthesist on this movie. I'm always amazed just seeing how much he actually has worked on over the years, and it was really cool seeing his name popping up in the credits. Visually, this movie is great, and since it's set in the same world as the animated series, it looks and feels just like the show. Even with an increased budget, it still maintains the simpler gothic designs and 20s Art Deco style mixed in with futuristic technology, but does allow for something that does feel bigger and grander. Especially the opening title sequence of this movie, which is actually a 3D rendered version of this version of Gotham City. It doesn't look out of place, and it really does suit and match the style that this version of Gotham does have. It does genuinely look fantastic overall. The entire movie does look incredible, and I do love a lot of the more smaller, subtler details that are added into this. I do think that the larger budget probably helped with that. Initially, this movie was set to be just a direct-to-DVD movie. It wasn't intended to be a theatrical release, but classic Warner Brothers last minute decision making, they decided to give this a theatrical release. But because it was so short notice, the movie did not actually make that much money. It actually failed at the box office. Good to see Warner Brothers decision making hasn't changed. Unfortunately, that meant that all the animated Batman movies that were released since were never given a theatrical release until a limited run of the very divisive adaptation of Killing Joke. What this movie and the animated series did differently to a lot of other 2D cartoon series out there is that when it was creating the animation and art style, what they used for this film is they used light colours on black paper. And the reason for that is because it gives this movie and the TV series a naturally darker look. It really works well, and honestly, whoever it was who made that call in the first place, they knew what they were doing. It allows for much darker imagery, and the shadows are way more prominent because of it. And that also includes one of my other favourite scenes from this entire movie, and that sees Bruce putting on the Batsuit for the very first time. You don't see the suit, most of it is just cast in shadows, and the only reaction that we actually see is from Alfred when when he sees Batman for the first time. Again, matched with that incredible soundtrack, it is one of the greatest superhero suit-up scenes that has ever been created. When it comes to the overall designs of both Gotham and the characters in this movie, I do think that these are some of the best interpretations of these characters. They look really good, and the way that they're drawn, it does allow for the animation to flow very naturally. I even love one scene where in the past we get to see a glimpse of a futuristic version of Gotham, which is really bright, colourful and optimistic, and then later we see it all dark, lifeless and falling apart, which is a really smart visual. I also think the imagery of Batman and Joker fighting each other over this dark Gotham might not necessarily be intended to be this, but it is a fantastic representation of what that futuristic Gotham actually did turn into with Batman and Joker. I've also got to quickly mention the action and fight scenes in this movie because yes, this is rated a PG, just like the TV series was. But just like the show, it does push those boundaries just a bit further than you might be expecting for this. And honestly, in my opinion, this movie should probably be a 12. It can get quite cartoonish, especially when the Joker gets involved, but it is kept surprisingly quite grounded and can get quite bloody, brutal and a bit disturbing as well, especially during the final confrontation with Batman getting sliced up by drone planes and Joker even getting one of his teeth kicked out. But I love that. It keeps this feeling believable, and despite some of the more over-the-top elements, it helps Batman feel more human because he does make mistakes, he does get injured, and he's not always on top of everything. It is an excellent decision, and it is one of the reasons why people love this version of Batman. Overall, without question, this is one of the best Batman movies that has ever been made. It's dark, mature, takes itself seriously, but still leaves some room for comic book fun and comedy. The story is really good and investing, and the mystery is built up really well and paid off excellently. The voice talents are fantastic, and the characters are very well realised, with this featuring some of the best interpretations of these characters. Some, in my opinion, are a little bit underused and could have had a small bit more to do, but given the short runtime, it does make sense. The action, animation and art style are absolutely fantastic and really suit this character really well, and the soundtrack is some of the best music to come from the Batman animated universe. If you have never seen this movie before, give it a go. If you're a fan of Batman, then this is a must-watch movie alongside the show. Don't be one of those grown-ups who says, it's a cartoon, it's for kids. This movie is not just made for kids. This is a very well-made film that is both complex and an engaging enough detective story for the whole family. I love it, and it is absolutely one of my favourite DC animated movies. So with all that being said, my rating for Batman Mask of the Phantasm is a 9 out of 10. This was a big surprise when I first got around to watching this movie. I have a box set of a load of different DC animated movies, and it had things like Wonder Woman, Green Lantern First Flight, both of which are excellent movies, Superman Doomsday as well, which I liked, but it's not quite as good as The Death of Superman. And I wasn't really sure what to think of this within the first few minutes or so. I was a bit like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this one or not. And by the end of it, it was one of my absolute favourites. So just to reiterate for DC fans out there, do yourself a favour and go watch this. Well, I think that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video. So if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the notification button to keep up to date on everything that's going on here. If you have seen Batman Mask of the Phantasm, let me know down below what you think of it. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like to see me do, let me know down below. And also, let me know what your favourite DC animated movie is. Let me know down below. I have got a ton of videos planned to be released this year. I don't know if I'm going to have time to do absolutely every single one of them, but fingers crossed I will. And I've also got to quickly mention, and I know that I do this after every single milestone, but it does need saying, thank you all for the support that you've given me over the past few years. I have really appreciated it. I know that this channel isn't huge, and I know that the content isn't always the most gripping to watch, but honestly, every single bit of support that you guys have given me, thank you so much. It's allowed me to keep doing this. It's made me want to keep going with this channel. I want to keep talking about the movies that I absolutely love, as well as checking out a load of movies that I've never seen before. So thank you all for every bit of support that you've given me. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time on Rewind Reviews. See you guys.